Friends, last time we talked in detail about the characteristics of romantic poetry. Today, we are going to discuss the characteristics of metaphysical poetry. But before that, let's see that school of metaphysical poetry was established by John Donne. It was established by John Donne. So Donne was the founder of metaphysical school of poetry or school of metaphysical poetry. The term metaphysical was first used by Dr. Samuel Johnson. Do you have any information about Samuel Johnson? Dr. Samuel Johnson is the writer of a very famous book, Preface to Shakespeare. And it was he who first applied the term metaphysical poetry to a group of 17th century poets. To the group of 17th century poets. The term metaphysical was not coined by Dr. Johnson. It was actually borrowed by Dr. Samuel Johnson from John Dryden. John Dryden. So John Dryden is senior poet as far as 18th century poetry is concerned, or poetry of the age of reason is concerned. John Dryden is senior to Alexander Pope. But Alexander Pope, he was the prominent poet, he was the dominant poet. What is metaphysics? What is metaphysics? Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. Meta is a prefix. It means beyond. Meta means beyond. Metaphysical, that is beyond physical. What is beyond physical is intellectual, extraordinary, highly intellectual, highly witty. That is metaphysical. When we study metaphysical poetry, or when we compare metaphysical poetry to romantic poetry, or metaphysical poetry to 18th century poetry or Elizabethan poetry, we immediately understand the difference between metaphysical poetry and the other poetry. Metaphysical poetry is definitely intellectual. It appeals to the brain, it appeals to the reason, it appeals to the intellect. Normally, we see that romantic poetry, especially poetry of Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Walter Scott, Byron, Robert Southey, that is romantic poetry. It appeals to the heart. It is full of emotions, feelings. It is full of sentiments. But as far as metaphysical poetry is concerned, like 18th century poetry of the age of Augustine or poetry of the age of Alexander Pope, it appeals to the brain, it appeals to the intellect. It is highly intellectual poetry. So metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. And we witness this when we study Donne, Marvell, other metaphysical poets. We understand that metaphysical poetry is intellectual poetry. It is full of conceits. It is full of far-fetched imagery, and it is written in a very refined language, and therefore it is very difficult to understand. It is obscure to understand. Now, let's say one by one the characteristics of metaphysical poetry. First characteristic is novel thought and expression. This is the first characteristic or first salient feature of metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical poets were interested in something new. Novel means something new. They were not interested in what has been already said. They were always interested in exploring something new, in finding out something new. That is the reason why novel thought. They thought the way nobody had thought. They thought differently. And their ideas they expressed in a new manner, in a new way. And therefore, the first important feature is novel thought and expression. New thought. We can say strange. And expression. Metaphysical poets borrowed material from geography, geometry, mathematics, science, technology, philosophy, engineering. This is something strange. And that material they presented before the readers in a new manner. And therefore, this is very important first feature of metaphysical poetry, that is novel thought and expression. The second characteristic is obscurity. Obscurity means difficulty. Metaphysical poetry is complex. Metaphysical poetry is difficult to understand. Metaphysical poetry is not easy to follow. It is highly intellectual. It is highly obscure, that is difficult to understand. Now here we have to see why it is difficult to understand. Why it is not easy to understand or simple to understand. What exactly has made metaphysical poetry complex? What has made metaphysical poetry complicated? The answer is the primary motive of the metaphysical poets, aim of the metaphysical poets, goal of the metaphysical poets, aspiration, ambition of the metaphysical poets was to show their learning, to show their scholarship. Metaphysical poets were men of great learning. They were men of great scholarship. They were men of great knowledge. And to show their knowledge was their main objective. To display their talent was their chief aim. To show their intellect was their main aim. And that is the reason why they have borrowed material for their poems from strange fields like engineering, technology, and mathematics and philosophy. And image is borrowed, material borrowed, that is presented in a different way, and that has made metaphysical poetry difficult to understand. For example, conceit. Conceit means far-fetched imagination. Metaphysical poetry is full of conceits. Metaphysical poetry is full of such far-fetched images. One example I would like to give you. John Donne has written one poem. It is called The Flea. The name of the poem is The Flea. What is flea? Flea is biting insect. Flea is poisonous insect. It is, stinging insect. It is poisonous, it is stinging. And it is like mosquito. What has inspired Donne to write this poem? This is wonderful to understand, or this is wonderful to know. During his life, John Donne, he had proposed to one lady. He had proposed to one lady, and that lady had rejected the proposal of John Donne. Now, you and me would have got angry. Normally, what do the people do when love proposal is rejected? Either they turn insane, they turn mad, or commit suicide. But as far as John Donne was concerned, he got inspiration to write a poem when one lady rejected his proposal. And writing a poem, he convinced the lady. He made the lady understand. What he made the lady understand? Let's see. He tells through this poem to that lady that the flea came, sucked his blood. And then the flea came to you, sucked your blood. So what is there in the stomach of the flea? Union of my and your blood. That exactly is the purpose of marriage. What happens when man and woman marry? The same. There is a union of his and her blood. So he tells her that whatever she denied, whatever she rejected, whatever she denied, that has been already accomplished in the stomach of the flea. So it is useless on her part. It was useless on her part to reject his proposal. Now, this is called conceit. This is called conceit. This is far-fetched imagery. Another example is from the field of geometry, mathematics. John Donne has borrowed the conceit of conceit of compass. This is wife. One pair represents wife and the other pair represents husband. Name of the poem written by him. Again, this poem is not prescribed for your study. The earlier poem, The Flea, referred to, that is also not prescribed for your study. But I am giving you these examples in order to make you understand why metaphysical poetry is obscure, why metaphysical poetry is difficult to understand. Metaphysical poetry is difficult to understand because of conceits. And what is conceit? To understand, to enable you, to make you understand the conceit, I am giving you the examples of conceits. Here, the second example is conceit of a compass. One pair stands for wife, other pair stands for husband. Name of the poem is A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. Mourning means, do you know the meaning of mourning? What is mean by mourning? What is the meaning of mourning? Mourning means expressing sorrow, expressing misery. That is mourning. Mourning means weeping. Mourning means crying. Mourning means shouting. So, wife is mourning, wife is weeping, wife is sad. Why wife is sad? Because her husband is moving. Her husband is moving all over the world, and her husband makes her stay at home. We know that this pair doesn't move, this doesn't move, it is stable, and this is stationary. It moves. And therefore, wife feels that her husband is separated from her. And so, to make her understand, Dunn tells her that husband has to move around, without which circle of life can never be completed. If she also starts moving with husband, no circle will be completed. I mean, it is the matter of common sense to understand what will happen if both the pairs move, no circle will be completed. So husband consoles his wife, not to weep, not to express sorrow. Bodily they are two, physically they are two, by heart, by soul, by mind, they are one. Look at the other end. Look at the other end. Here they are one. Here by soul, by heart, by mind, they are one. Physically only they are separated. Bodily only they are separated. Now, this is called conceit. Conceit means far-fetched imagination. And metaphysical poetry is full of such conceits. And these conceits make metaphysical poetry difficult to understand. Conceits abound in metaphysical poetry. Conceits make metaphysical poetry complex to understand. And therefore, second important feature or second important characteristic of metaphysical poetry is obscurity. Metaphysical poetry, like the other poetry, is not simple to understand. It is not simple to follow, it is difficult to understand, it is obscure, and we have seen just the reason which is responsible for obscurity in metaphysical poetry. That is conceit. The third characteristic is scholarship. Just I have told you that metaphysical poets were scholars. I have forgotten to tell you the metaphysical poets. Dunn, I told you, John Donne. John Donne is the founder of the school of metaphysical poetry. Then we find Andrew Marvell. Then we find George Herbert. After George Herbert, there is Richard Crashaw. After Richard Crashaw, we have Thomas Carey. And after Thomas Carey, we have Henry Vaughan. After Thomas Carey, we have Henry Vaughan. These are metaphysical poets. John Donne, Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Thomas Carey, and Henry Vaughan. Now, these metaphysical poets, they were men of great scholarship. Here, what is the meaning of scholarship? The meaning of scholarship is learning, wisdom. These metaphysical poets were great men of learning, or men of great learning, men of great intellect. They were all intellectuals. Just I have told you sometimes back that metaphysical poetry appeals to the intellect because it is written by the intellectuals. It is not like romantic poetry. a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility. It is highly witty, it is highly intellectual, because these were the men of great learning, great knowledge, great intellect, great talent, and their main aim was to show to the others how great they were. That is, their chief aim was to display their learning. Their main objective was to show their scholarship. And therefore, another important feature is scholarship. Another important feature of metaphysical poetry or characteristic of metaphysical poetry. Scholarship. To show their scholarship was their main business, or it was their chief aim. Then, metaphysical poetry is religious. Metaphysical poetry is religious and amorous. Amorous means love. Religious. The 6-7 metaphysical poets, they have written their poems on varied themes, such as religion and love. For example, George Herbert's poem, The Pullet. It is a religious poem, highly religious poem. And so many metaphysical poets have written poems on the theme of love. And on the basis of that, metaphysical poetry is described as highly religious and amorous. Amorous means love. On the theme of love, so many poets. For example, again, take Andrew Marvell. Andrew Marvell has written a poem on the theme of love, and it is to his coy mistress. Mistress of, beloved of Andrew Marvell is coy. Coy means shy. She is not bold. She is not courageous enough to meet her lover and accept the proposal of love. And based on that relation between lover and beloved, Andrew Marvell has written a very fine, world famous poem. It is called To His Coy Mistress. And in that poem, he tells to his mistress, don't be shy, don't be coy, let's come and make love. It's a very common philosophy. Robert Herrick has written one such poem. Though Robert Herrick is not a metaphysical poet, he has written such type of poem. The title of the poem is To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. In that poem, Robert Herrick gives a good piece of advice to the unmarried girls, that they should use their youth at the appropriate time. They should use their prime at the appropriate time. That is, when they are young, when they are in their youth, they should marry. If they tarry, that is, if they delay in their youth, they never marry. They tarry forever. It's a good piece of advice to the girls of marriageable age. Like that, Andrew Marvell also, through the poem To His Coy Mistress, tells his beloved, don't be coy, don't be shy. Let's come and make love. Otherwise, time and tide wait for none. Time and tide, gradually, slowly pass. And with the passage of time, what will happen? Her hair will turn grey, her hair will turn white, and her skin will be wrinkled, and she will be old. Nobody will look at her. then nobody will look at her. And therefore, to this poem, Andrew Marvell appeals from the bottom of his heart to his beloved that shed your coyness, throw away her coyness, and let's come marry him, be his wife, and make love. That is, they should use their prime at the appropriate time. So this is the amorous, this is the theme of love. John Donne has written so many poems based on the theme of love. Andrew Marvell and the other poets, they have also written poems on the theme of love. And therefore, religious and amorous is one of the prominent features of metaphysical poetry, or it is one of the important salient features of metaphysical poetry. Now we shall stop over here. Next time we'll continue the same topic, that is characteristics of metaphysical poetry. Okay, see you.